The May sun scorched Washington, D.C. But inside the West Wing, a different kind of heat was rising. Vice President J.D. Vance stormed down the marble corridor of the White House, a black folder clenched tightly under his arm. His security team struggling to keep up. His jaw was set, his eyes tired, determined. 2 hours. He barked to his chief of staff. Malcolm Reed, I want every intelligence report on this phenomenon. Reed, tapping furiously on a tablet, nodded. Yes. Sia, do you want me to loop in the State Department? Vance stopped dead in his tracks. No. Not yet. This stays internal until we know what we're dealing with. What they were dealing with was something no one had seen coming. Inside the Situation Room, the lights were low, the screens glowing with live footage. Protesters filled the streets of Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. But it wasn't a politician, a celebrity, or even a domestic event that ignited the fury. It was a face almost no American would have recognized a month ago. Ibrahim Traoré, a military leader from Burkina Faso, now splashed across t-shirts, banners, and giant building projections like a global icon. His voice echoed through social feeds. His speeches were remixed, subtitled, turned into rallying cries. And somehow, millions of Americans were listening. Vance stared at the screens, almost disbelieving. How does a man from a country most Americans can't even point to on a map become the symbol of unrest in our own backyard? Across the room, social media analyst Sophia Chen pulled up a video. He said something that hit home. Sia, she explained. He talked about dignity, about not needing foreign saviors, about people owning their future. The room went still. Outside, sirens screamed, helicopters hovered, and across America, something strange was happening. A movement was being born, and its face didn't belong to anyone from here. Thousands of miles away, the sun dipped low over Ouagadougou, painting the skies above Burkina Faso in soft amber. Inside the modest yet commanding Kosiam Palace, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood at his office window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. At 36, he led his nation with quiet intensity, disciplined, composed, unshaken. Mr. President, a gentle voice interrupted. It was Amara Diallo, his trusted communications advisor, dressed in a tailored blazer made from traditional fabric. She stepped inside, holding a folder. You should see this, she said carefully. It's about the United States. Traoré turned, his face as unreadable as ever. Amara handed him a tablet, then stood in silence as he scrolled. Protest footage. But not from Africa. From America. Chicago. New York. Seattle. Los Angeles. Crowds. Posters. Chanting. His face. His words translated into English repeated through megaphones. Our dignity is not for sale. We don't need saviors. We need sovereignty. He set the tablet down slowly. This is unexpected. Amara nodded. No official U.S. statement yet, but their vice president, J.D. Vance, is personally monitoring it. Traoré's lips tightened slightly, his mind already turning. We say nothing for now. He decided. No statements. No interviews. We stay out of it. But Sir. Amara hesitated. This could shift our already fragile relations with Washington. Traoré didn't flinch. Our mission remains unchanged. Burkina Faso comes first. He stepped back to the window, watching the sun disappear behind the rooftops of his city. Somewhere far away, millions were chanting his name. But here, in his own land, the work was far from finished. We are not the story. Amara, he said softly, let the world speak. Let them march. But we build. The air was heavy with meaning. A foreign voice had ignited a fire in America. But here in Ouagadougou, that same voice whispered only one thing: focus. The morning sky over Detroit was pale gray, but the energy in the streets burned bright. At the steps of the global mining corporation, a crowd had gathered, young, old, students, veterans, and at the center stood Zoe Williams. Archisse, fearless, electric, and holding a megaphone like it was a sword. Her voice rang out, sharp and full of fire. They told us we had no choice. She shouted that we had to accept polluted water, poisoned soil, and jobs that barely pay enough to survive, all for progress. The crowd roared in agreement. She paused, then lifted her phone. But then a voice came. Not from here, from across the ocean. A man who didn't ask permission to protect his people. He just did it. Zoe tapped play. A clip from Ibrahim Traoré's speech filled the air. His words steady and defiant. When they say we can't survive without their investments, they mean we are nothing without their control. But our dignity is not for sale. Applause exploded through the plaza. Not far away, journalist Marcus Johnson of the Detroit Chronicle was scribbling furiously into his tablet. He turned to a protester beside him, a calm, middle-aged man in a worn t-shirt with Traoré's face on it. Do you really think a foreign leader is who Americans should follow? The man introduced himself. David Chen, sociology professor. He smiled gently. It's not about following, he said. It's about recognizing truth spoken clearly, without fear, and realizing it doesn't matter where it comes from. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Across the city, screen lit up. Hashtags surged. Flyers spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a protest anymore. It was a message, a movement. And somehow, impossibly, the words of a young African leader had cracked open something deep in the American soul. The question now wasn't who started it. It was how far it would go. Back in Washington, the tension had become unbearable. Inside the West Wing, screens flickered with drone footage of protests sweeping across the country. J.D. Vance stood motionless, arms folded, eyes fixed on the growing tide. 200,000 in the streets, whispered Sophia Chen. 30 cities, and it's still growing. Reed cleared his throat. Sir, Fox News is calling it a national security threat, suggesting foreign influence. Vance's gaze didn't move. And CNN, they're focused on economic justice. They're quoting Traoré, word for word. He finally turned. Prepare a statement. No. Not just a statement. A national address. Tomorrow morning. Everyone went silent. He walked to the window, looking out over a capital city, unsure of itself. This started with a video, he muttered, and now it's fire. That night, the East Room of the White House buzzed with technicians. Microphones were checked, cameras adjusted, flags positioned. Vance sat with Malcolm Reed one last time, reviewing his speech. "Remember," Reed said carefully, "acknowledge the pain, but don't legitimize the man." At exactly 10 a.m., J.D. Vance stepped up to the podium. "Good morning, my fellow Americans." He spoke clearly, deliberately. Yes, there are protests. Yes, people are angry. And yes, they have the right to be. He paused, letting the words land. "I grew up in a working-class town in Ohio. I understand frustration. I understand what it feels like to be left behind." He leaned forward, lowering his voice just slightly. "But I must be honest, elevating a foreign military leader as the symbol of this movement is troubling. Real change in this country must come through democratic means, through the rule of law." He shifted again, tone more inviting, to the organizers. "I say this, I hear you. This administration hears you. Join me here. Next week. Let's talk face to face." Cameras clicked. Advisors nodded. Then came the closer measured, controlled, and any attempt by foreign actors to exploit our internal challenges will not be tolerated. The speech was over, but the battle for the narrative had only just begun. As J.D. Vance's speech echoed across the nation, Zoe Williams stood frozen in the center of a crowded community hall in Detroit. The movement's core organizers, young, old, bold, had gathered around a flickering projector screen, watching every word from the vice president. When it ended, silence fell. Then Zoe's voice cut through. "He's trying to split us," she said, her eyes burning. "He invites a few of us to the White House, while hinting we're being manipulated by foreign forces." An older activist, Ray, folded his arms. "Still, he heard us. That's more than most do. Shouldn't we send someone?" The room erupted, arguments flying from every direction. "Going legitimizes their system. We'll be co-opted." "No, it's a chance to be heard." Zoe climbed onto a folding chair, raising both arms. The crowd hushed. "We can do both," she declared. "We show up, but we don't shut up. We speak in that room, and we stay in these streets." She pulled out her phone. "Hit play." Traoré's voice rang out again. "When they realize they can't defeat you, they'll try to absorb you. They'll offer small concessions, hoping you abandon the greater fight." The room trembled with applause. "Our dignity," Zoe said firmly, "is non-negotiable." Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. But no one moved. Momentum had taken root. This wasn't about Burkina Faso anymore. This was about broken promises, poisoned rivers, and boarded-up factories. It was about America. And as the movement's representatives were chosen for the White House meeting, a new understanding settled over the room. They weren't chasing justice from the system. They were forcing the system to look them in the eye. The line had been drawn, and for the first time in a long time, the people on the margins felt something powerful. They weren't just demanding change. They were becoming it. A crisp wind blew through the gates of the White House as 5 movement leaders walked forward, heads high, shoulders squared. Zoe Williams led the group, her braids whipped in the breeze. But her resolve never wavered. Inside the Roosevelt Room, J.D. Vance waited, A small team of advisors flanked him. Cameras flashed as the two sides met. Smiles practiced. Handshakes brief. "Welcome to the White House," Vance said. "Thank you for coming." Zoe's voice was calm but firm. "We're here to represent millions who are tired of being ignored." Once the press exited and the doors closed, the room shifted. No more smiles. Vance leaned forward. "Let's be direct. This movement caught the government off guard. We need to understand what you want, specifically." Without flinching, Zoe reached into her bag and placed a thick document on the table. 20 pages. Detailed. Backed by data. "But I'll summarize." She took a breath. "We want legislation that gives local communities veto power over extraction projects. We want corporations to pay their fair share. And we want massive investment in green infrastructure owned and run by the people who live there." Vance flipped through the pages. "Unreadable. Ambitious," he muttered. "So was the Declaration of Independence." Zoe replied, "And if that document were written today, they'd probably call it radical too." JD looked up. "You keep quoting Traoré." Why before Zoe could answer? Ray spoke up. "It's not about idolizing him. It's about finally hearing anyone say out loud what we've felt for years. That our voices matter. That exploitation isn't destiny." Vance leaned back. Quiet for a long moment. "Maybe what worries me," he admitted, "isn't your admiration for Traoré. It's that we haven't had the courage to say those things ourselves." Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, something had shifted. Not just tension, but the beginning of a reckoning. While America debated, Ibrahim Traoré stayed silent. In a sunlit room inside the Kossiam Palace, he sat shoulder to shoulder with village elders from Burkina Faso's southern border. No cameras. No ceremony. Just dusty boots. Handwritten notes. And real problems. "Since the illegal companies left," said one elder, "the children no longer cough from the water. But we still need help to rebuild." Traoré didn't delegate. He listened. Took notes himself. "We'll send engineers next week," he promised. "And we'll train local youth to maintain the system long-term." As the elders nodded with gratitude, Amara Diallo entered quietly. "Sir," she said. "News from the U.S. The Vice President's meeting with protest leaders is happening now. Also, similar protests are emerging in France, Canada, even Australia." Traoré raised an eyebrow. "Still using my image?" "Yes," Amara replied. "They're calling it the Traoré effect." He exhaled slowly, setting his pen down. "Ironic, isn't it?" he said. "We spent years fighting foreign influence here, and now I've become a foreign influence elsewhere." Amara offered a slight smile. "But you didn't impose anything. Sia. People chose your words." He stood and walked toward a map pinned with flags, schools under construction, water projects underway, roads being repaired. "Keep our focus here," he said. "Let others talk about symbols. We'll build substance." But even he couldn't ignore what came next. News broke that the U.S. government was drafting legislation, the Community Empowerment Act, reflecting key protest demands. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And for the first time in decades, American communities were seeing movement, real blank, tangible, legislative change. Across the ocean, Traoré didn't gloat. He returned to work, reading reports, meeting villagers, tracking progress. Yet in his silence, something rang louder than speeches. He hadn't set out to change the world. He just told the truth. And somehow, the world had listened. 3 weeks later, the sky over Washington was clear, but beneath the calm, everything had changed. Inside the vice president's office, J.D. Vance stood beside a wall-length window, reviewing the latest report. Approval ratings up 12 points, said Malcolm Reed, handing over a folder. Since you signed the Community Empowerment Act. Vance scanned the numbers, nodding slowly. And the streets quieter. Reed replied, still active, but the energy has shifted. People are watching now. Not just marching. Vance looked over his shoulder. And what about Traoré? Reed hesitated. His image is still out there. But the movement is evolving. New leaders are rising. Local voix. Vance leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing with thought. I saw him as a threat, he admitted. A foreign soldier lighting fires in our backyard. But maybe he reminded us of something we forgot. Reed raised an eyebrow. Like what? That self-determination, Vance said softly, isn't just a foreign demand. It's an American promise too. He turned to the window again. Schedule a call, he said suddenly, with President Traoré. Thousands of miles away, in a gleaming refinery powered by local workers, Ibrahim Traoré stood among pipes and gauge, watching refined oil flow through clear tubing. Amara approached, tablet in hand. Vice President Vance would like to speak with you. Tomorrow. Traoré raised his eyebrows slightly, then nodded. Accept the call. He glanced around the facility built with local labor, using national resources, under local control. You know, Amara, he said thoughtfully. When we started this path, many thought we'd collapse under pressure. And now, she replied, your words are echoing across continents. Traoré smiled faintly. It was never about the words. He turned toward a young engineer, proudly holding a report. It's about proving we can stand on our own and still reach across borders. The call with Washington would come tomorrow. But tonight, the refinery hummed with purpose. Proof that dignity could be built, not borrowed. Morning broke over Washington, with golden light spilling across the White House lawn. In Ouagadougou, it was dusk, soft shadows falling over the Kosium Palace. And for the first time, J.D. Vance and Ibrahim Traoré saw each other face to face digitally, but unmistakably present. President Traoré. Vance began, his tone formal but steady. Thank you for accepting this conversation. Traoré gave a policenot. Unexpected, but welcome. Mr. Vice President. For a moment, both men were quiet leaders from two worlds, now bound by one shared storm. I'll be candid, Vance continued. What happened in our country? It wasn't about foreign interference. Not in the traditional sense. Traoré's brow lifted slightly. It was the resonance of ideas. Vance said, your words hit something raw in our people. Something we hadn't addressed ourselves. Traoré leaned forward. People. Everywhere. I want control over their own lives. That isn't a Burkina message. It's human. Vance nodded slowly. We may disagree on systems, but we can agree on that. For the next hour, The conversation flowed trade, development, local sovereignty, mutual respect, no threats, no demands, just two men navigating new territory. Where influence wasn't seized, it was felt. At the end, Vance made a surprising offer. We're hosting a global summit on sustainable development next month. Virtually. I'd like you to speak. Traoré pauzet. I accept. No handshakes. No applause. Just the quiet weight of something real. When the call ended, both leaders sat in silence. Across the world, headlines began to shift. From protest to partnership. From confrontation to conversation. That night, as Traoré walked alone through the refinery courtyard, a group of young engineers waved him over. Production's up 15%. I see. One said proudly. He smiled. Good. But more important, are we training the next generation to run it without us? They nodded. That, Traoré thought, is the future. Not being followed, but being multiplied. 6 months later, Detroit felt different. At a corner cafe, Marcus Johnson sat across from Zoe Williams. Recorder on the table, fingers poised to capture history. His book, The Traoré Effect, had just hit #1 in 23 countries. If you could go back, Marcus asked. 2. Before the protests, before the speech, what would you say to yourself? Zoe looked out the window. Outside, a once abandoned factory, now pulsed with life. Solar panels gleamed on the roof. A mural stretched across the wall, our future. Our choice. I'd say this, she whispered. Trust the truth. When it lands at the right time, even a whisper can move mountains. Do you still see this as Traoré's movement? Marcus asked. Zoe smiled. He lit the match. But the fire that belongs to us? Across the ocean. In Ouagadougou. Ibrahim Traoré reviewed a new trade agreement with regional allies. His reforms had sparked steady growth schools, water systems, jobs, not a revolution, a foundation. Amara Diallo entered with updates. The Global Summit replay hit 50 million views. And your book, still topping charts. Traoré barely looked up. And the schools in the East finished early. Fully staffed. Running well. He nodded. That's what matters. Then he stood and stared at the world map behind his desk, dots scattered across continents. Not military bases. Not campaigns. Ideas. Movements. Proof that influence didn't have to arrive in tanks or money. Sometimes, it came wrapped in conviction and carried by people who simply refused to be ignored. At the White House, J.D. Vance met with community leaders launching the second phase of the Community Empowerment Act. Red and blue districts alike had signed on. Later, alone in his office, he gazed at a framed photo. 2 men on a split screen, bridging continents through a single idea. Self-determination. Not a weapon. Not a threat. But a right. And in that quiet moment, beneath a setting American sun, Vance understood something deeper. The strongest power is the kind that doesn't need to demand attention. It earns it. Back in Ouagadougou, the air was thick with late summer heat. But inside the palace, Ibrahim Traoré remained focused. Stacks of development plans covered his desk. A new trade deal with neighboring countries. Rural electrification proposals. School blueprints. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. Just work. That morning, Amara Diallo stepped into his office, holding the weekly international press brief. The book is still topping bestseller lists in 23 countries, she said. The summit footage has passed 50 million views. Traoré barely looked up. And the new water systems, operational in the northern villages, ahead of schedule. Good, he replied, eyes still on a map of his country. That's where real progress lives. She paused, watching him. You know, Isir, she said softly, you never asked for this spotlight. Yet, you've become a symbol across the world. Traoré finally leaned back in his chair, letting the silence speak for a moment. What's most surprising, he said, is how simple it was. Amara frowned. Simple. He nodded. No armies. No propaganda. No sanctions. Just truth. Spoken plainly. At the right time, he stood and walked to the large wall map, a world dotted with pins. But not for conquests. For communities. Protests. Projects. Hope. Maybe that's what scares powerful nations the most. He continued. That real influence isn't forced, it's chosen. Meanwhile, in the U.S., J.D. Vance stood before a packed town hall in Ohio. He wasn't lecturing, he was listening. Farmers, teachers, veterans, students, all asking to be heard. And for once, they were. Afterward, alone in his office, he stared at the same split-screen photo him on one side, Traoré on the other. Two leaders from different worlds, unexpectedly connected, not through politics, but through a principle. True leadership doesn't command attention. It earns trust. And somewhere, between Ouagadougou and Washington, that quiet revolution had already begun. One truth, one voice, one decision at a time. 12 months had passed. The headlines had moved on. The protests had quieted. The cameras, once obsessed, had drifted elsewhere. But something remained. In Detroit, where it all began, the old mining plaza had become a community energy hub, solar-powered, locally run, and humming with life. Zoe Williams stood beside a group of high school students, guiding them through the control room. This isn't about energy, she said. It's about ownership. One girl looked up. You really talked to the vice president, Zoe smiled. We didn't just talk. We changed the rules. Across the world, in a small village in eastern Burkina Faso, a new school opened its doors. Children poured in, barefoot and laughing, their futures suddenly a little brighter. Ibrahim Traoré arrived unannounced, as he often did. No cameras, no speeches, just quiet observation. He sat in the back of a classroom while a teacher wrote on the chalkboard, "Our land, our future." The students didn't even notice the president in the room. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Later that evening, he sat alone under the stars outside the palace, listening to the hum of the city he loved. Amara Diallo joined him, handing him a copy of The Traoré Effect, now translated into 17 languages. They're calling it required reading at universities, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I never wrote a word of it. She smiled. But you lived it. In Washington, J.D. Vance prepared for a second summit, this one focused on community resilience. Before stepping onto the stage, He glanced at a photo, taped inside his folder, a mural from Detroit. A young girl, with her hand on a solar panel, and beneath it, the words, "Our dignity is not for sale." That one line, spoken quietly in another land, had traveled farther than any law, louder than any speech. Because some truths don't expire. They echo, and when they reach the right ears, they become something bigger. They become change.